A warm welcome to everyone. Welcome to Soil Stories. So with that, let me introduce our guest, Phoebe Suina. So Phoebe is a hydrologist, but really that title describes just one aspect of her work. She is the founder and owner of High Watermark, LLC, which works with New Mexico communities, tribes, and Pueblos on a variety of issues and initiatives, from environmental policy, land acquisition, planning, infrastructure, and how governmental policies, laws, and priorities affect tribal communities in particular. Her traditional Pueblo background, Cochiti and San Felipe Pueblos, is complemented by formal training in environmental engineering and project management. She has a deep-rooted understanding, respect for, and love of water, which drives her work in the stewardship of water, and I would say also soil. Her consensus-based approach incorporates traditional, cultural, and local knowledge, and includes initiatives that engage local leadership and support resilience. We've asked her to talk to us today specifically about her extensive experience with post-wildfire flooding, restoring the soil and watershed after a fire, and Indigenous practices that prevent and mitigate the impact of wildfires, as we are experiencing multiple big fires across the state. Thank you so much for making the time, Phoebe. Really appreciate you making it possible to speak to us today.
First of all, go out to Hopa, Gaishbia, Zessin Honersuta, Kokiteme, Kachteme Osuta. So my name is Phoebe Suina. I just shared my Indian name along with my clan, and that I am from the Pueblos of Cochiti and San Felipe. I'm here today on the lands of Cochiti. And one of the things I just want to acknowledge is, here in New Mexico, especially along the Middle Rio Grande, we are on lands that the Pueblo people have been inhabited since time immemorial. And we have in-depth and very, long-standing connection to our land here as the stewards, so it's been very difficult through 3 different governments to have to adjust to how we how we talk about the land, and now in this U.S. government jurisdictional realm of ownership, which is something that we don't normally do, and don't in our way. We don't own land, but we're sort of forced to kind of identify that as ownership and jurisdiction. But well beyond these jurisdictional boundaries, we have our ancestral lands and cultural lands that we have essential and critical habitat and cultural resources. So is that along the land acknowledgement? I know I went a little bit further, but I appreciate that. Wonderful, wonderful. So great to see everybody. I see some familiar names as well as some familiar faces. So welcome, Russ. I know we had a lunch the other day. Good afternoon. And so from my understanding is this forum was to share some soil stories and about the landscape. And I think today I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're dealing here in New Mexico and some of the lands I just acknowledged. Here in Cochiti and above Cochiti, we have multiple watersheds. So one of the complexities that we as Pueblo people have to navigate is we have sacred information along with locations of sacred areas that we can't locate on maps. But once we can frame it in maybe a more ecosystem approach of looking at watersheds, everybody can understand watersheds, and we can speak about watersheds as kind of a delineation of an ecosystem. So here in Cochiti, we talk about the multiple watersheds from Peralta watershed, all the way up to Highway 4, southern boundary of Los Alamos National Laboratory, to Frijoles watershed and Frijoles Canyon. All of these canyons are very important to the Cochiti people, and also the stewardship of these canyons are very critical, which includes the stewardship of the soil and everything connected in those watersheds. And unfortunately, these particular watersheds have been hit by multiple major and some catastrophic wildfires since the 1970s in particular, back to the La Mesa fire, Dome fire, Cerro Grande, Las Conchas, and now Sierra Pilado fires. And so one of the things that we're seeing in terms of the landscape and some of the projects that I've been involved with is, of course, the immediate triage after one of these catastrophic wildfires, but also looking at a long-term approach in terms of recovery and stewardship. Always talking about stewardship. And what does that mean? Well, that means really from our Pueblo perspective of how do we steward these resources in a sustainable manner, in a resilient manner, because when we steward these resources, we may need something for to help heal somebody, to help make sure we have certain medicines. I know one of the governors talks about our watersheds and our cultural areas as our medicine cabinet. And so we talk about, right, that's immediate if somebody in the family needs a certain medicine to go up there and harvest it. But an elder once shared with me, unfortunately, he just passed away last year, but one of his main things was, concepts to me was, when we go up there and we need something, we need a particular soil resource or a vegetative resource or water resource or animal resource. We go up there and first, whatever that is we need, we don't take the first of whatever is up there. And that's where I began to look at those kinds of teachings as looking at resiliency and sustainability for a particular resource. So you go up there, and if it's meant to be that you have that resource, or if you get that medicine, you go on, you pay respect to that resource that you come across. If it's a particular plant, you pay respect to it and the blessings. And if it is meant to be that you will be able to obtain that resource, it's not taking the first plant or first soil. It's going to the very next one and then taking that. And he told me, you only take what you need. You don't take what you want, or you don't take, to go and sell somewhere else and make some money off of it. You only take what you need. So that balancing of what you need. And he said, because that resource needs to be there for the next person that needs it. So by passing up that first one, whatever you take is not going to be the last one. And he didn't say it that way, but in the implementation of the teaching, that's in fact what happens. And by leaving more, that there's going to be more to come. And that resource, it's not, yes, it may seem like a instantaneous extraction, but it is also to help keep that balance. So in that being said is so another example is when my grandfather once told me there was a time when we didn't take the effort at the Pueblo from the village to go to the watershed when it was piñon picking time. We all got lazy So we didn't pick the piñons. Well, we didn't pick the piñons, and maybe the mice over reproduced because they were eating all the piñons, or the birds. And then we had mice infestation because the system was not balanced. So by us going to pick piñons, we are part of the system. We are part of the system of balance. So if we don't do our task in a sustainable manner, which means also taking some of those resources for sustainable eating, nutrition, or use, we are part of that ecosystem. We're part of the whole balance. And it's making sure we remember our responsibility in that balancing of the ecosystem. And so as I started the conversation about major wildfires, it's because our system is out of balance. Our watersheds are out of balance. And I'm a, background I'm my hydrologist, that's my passion. And we all know that water goes like this if it's in a healthy, sustainable manner. It goes back and forth. In engineering courses, it's that synovial system, up and down, and then it creates its own balance, its own equilibrium, just like a river. You hit it and it goes way up, way down, and eventually to have its back to its equilibrium, it's going to take time. So what we have with the major catastrophic wildfires, what we see is that system going up, going down, going up, going down. And whether we see it from a vegetative perspective or a water perspective, where we see major deposition, major erosion, deposition, erosion, flood, drought, flood, drought. So we're trying, these ecosystems are trying to get back to that equilibrium within its own little footprint, right? And why I bring that up is because right now we're seeing extremes. And this is where we all have to collectively work together, whether we look at watershed approaches or state approaches or whole country approaches or whole continent approaches. We all have to work together. And what we even do at the micro level, it affects the bigger portion, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like what we're doing within our own sphere of control, that we can even affect change. One little raindrop and its partners add up to more raindrops, that becomes a rainstorm. And so, but as individuals, we're one little raindrop. And so as I've continued to work with these watersheds, is looking at the immediate, midterm, and long-term recovery, and seeing how me as one little person or one little idea can help it reestablish the equilibrium in the system. And why that is important is because if we don't understand that we're part of that ecosystem, and we've gone from one extreme to the other, and I've heard folks say, oh no, that's for Mother Nature to take care of. And in one sense, that's true. But in another sense, we also have to recognize our contribution and our participation and our interdependence and interrelationship with the watersheds that we live in. And I don't think that we all and I'm the first to say, I'm human, I make mistakes, and I run around in little circles all day, like I did all day today. And I sometimes forget to stop to think about my relationships and my interrelationships and why those are important until I see my kids say, "Whoa, mama, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, okay, what I'm doing is affecting them. Let me slow down." And this is another thing too, I've talked to a lot of folks, and I think we're all worried about climate change. I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about my grandkids. And what we do today is really going to be that long-term effect. But we didn't get here overnight. We didn't get to where we're having floods and droughts overnight. And we got here through a very rough path and some big decisions and some big indecisions and some big activities, whatever you want to attribute it to. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of focus, perseverance, diligence, hard work to get back into some type of equilibrium, and also understanding our connection to our ecosystems and our environments. And so whether I'm talking about a big watershed like Capilene or Peralta, is one understanding that the measures or projects, like whether it's putting some grade control structures to reduce the degradation and the unraveling of the watershed, or to plant trees, simple thing as plant trees, or planting grasses. Although in the grand scheme of things, it's like, how is this one little Doug fir gonna help everything? Anything. And it takes me back to an experience I had from the tribal leadership from another Pueblo. There's this elder in his 80s hiking this little Doug fir up into the mountains, and him turning around and telling everybody, this little Doug fir, and all this sweat I'm putting in to try to plant this little Doug fir, remember, it's not for me. It's not for my kids. It's not even for my grandkids, because by the time this grows up, it's going to be for my great grandkids. So what we do here today is, in essence, not for us. It's for those future generations to have this resource. And for him to, and he's in his 80s, he's like, I'm not going to live another 20, 30 years. So it ain't for me, but I'm doing this right now because he believes in the ongoing persistence and resiliency and carrying on that way of life. That means we keep things in balance and we understand our interdependence and interrelationships with the ecosystems around us and those natural resources around us. And so what can I do as a farmer, as an individual? I'm looking at a 47 square mile watershed. There's some small projects we do. So we've been involved in tree planting. Personally, I've planted over 1,000 trees up in the Las Conchas burn area. And even with the Cerro Pelado, I'm like, oh my gosh, all of that's worth, like, where did all those little trees go? But one of the things I teach my kids too, or talk about with my kids is, all we can do is our best. We build, we do, spend hours, spend blood, sweat, and tears to do things to our best ability. And sometimes, like a fire will come back and take away all the hard work we did. But it's not it's not that we lost, but look at what we've gained. Because whatever we've put in will come back in some other form. And I've seen that on projects. I've seen that on projects in these watersheds where I think, oh man, I spent so many hours and spent all these dollars on these particular, for example, some great control structures, and they blew out, and oh man, that was, wasted money. But actually, fast forward years later, those great control structures might have blown out, but they added a place for some seed starters because they washed down and they deposited, and now there's a seed bank there of new trees, like new cottonwoods that are growing in that watershed. So there's silver linings all around that, we think like if we didn't succeed, that all was lost. And I'm a farmer. So me and my family, we have small farm in Sile, New Mexico. And there's times when I work with my kiddos. During COVID, my boyfriend, he was a tribal official. And so, and then COVID took all his time, navigating that. And so it's just me and my kids. And I'll show the picture here in a minute. And why I wanted to share this in particular is these are the little things that we do, and teaching our kids and actually doing and executing a project or farming every year reinvigorates my own belief and connection back to that stewardship and that way of life and that balance as my contribution to balancing the ecosystem. So these are my little ones. I call my son, his name is Kukui, that's his Indian name, and my daughter, her name is Kuomots. And so during COVID, us three, because my boyfriend was busy helping with navigate COVID for his Pueblo, we spent every day by hand tending to this field. We didn't use equipment. And you can see there's still a lot of weeds. People call them weeds, but it's how do we create balance with the vegetation? And there's life in the soil. And so I like to show this picture because, with COVID, we couldn't go to the movies, we couldn't do a lot of things and go to the amusement park. But this gave me an opportunity to actually execute an example of sustainable stewardship of this land. We grew blue corn. This is blue corn. And I was explaining to the kids, if we don't use heavy equipment, if we don't till, if we try to have companion planting, you can't see it here, but we had beans and we had some basil in some areas and marigolds in some areas, and really companion planting in this very small plot. This one was about a third to half an acre of corn. And we did everything by hand. And I said, you know what, if the soil is good, guess what we'll get? We're gonna get earthworms. And why those are good is my two kids love to fish. So we can get the earthworms and we don't have to go to Walmart or anything that's closed down for COVID, because we have the earthworms to go take fishing. And so what we found in this area is very robust earthworms. So we would harvest that. And that was like the daily activity that we used, that I used with my kids. And so that was the reward, was to go fishing. And so we went fishing, and then also teaching them why that interdependence and that whole relationship was so important. And I like to tell this story here as we were out there one day, and in our way is, working hard, sweating out there in the field, and putting our whole heart into taking care of this land. And just a quick story is, so as I was taught as a young girl, on a family farm at Cochiti, and through stories, is, every single corn from the seed that goes in the ground, and once it starts growing, to teach our kids and our young ones that those are like our kids. So this particular set of corn fell down numerous times. We would go in there, stand it back up, and the amount of time and energy to tend to them. And so this picture is really interesting because I took it, and it's hard to see what my kids are doing, but they're hugging each corn. They're hugging each corn and telling each corn that they love each corn, each stalk of corn, like they're their kids. And there were times when we were out there, like with headlights, fighting the mosquitoes. You can see my son's wearing and my daughter's wearing a mosquito jacket. Is kind of that blood, sweat, and tears. And one time we were out there, it was super hot. We were standing the corn back up because a windstorm came down and took so much time. And this is our connection back to the whole ecosystem. So I'm going to go back to that. We are part of the hydrological cycle because we are all walking bodies of water. Science says a majority of us being is water. That's what science says. We've known that, for since time immemorial. But now science says, okay, you're walking bodies of water. So we are part of that hydrological cycle. And so I was telling the kids, one day we're out there sweating and, drinking water, everything. And they, in how we take care of the land, all, like I said, the blood, sweat, and tears. When my son, he was, he was probably 7 in this picture, a little guy, and he's like, mama, it's so hot and it hasn't rained. And I said, just keep working, and we'll, in our way, if you believe, So after a long day, we're out there and we're worried about the corn making it because, we didn't have time to irrigate. We're busy like standing them back up. And just then, out of nowhere, this one little cloud comes out. And just in our little 1 acre area where we grew the corn, just a light sprinkle. And that's another reminder that we lived, that reminds me and showed my kids that we are indeed part of that cycle. The sweat that they perspired, it came back from the rain back down to our corn. And that was our sacrifice, right? That's our sacrifice, to work hard and work hard in the field. So that's the lesson my kids learned that day. And it's through some of these lessons, whether it's working in the professional field that I work in, looking at watershed recovery after a major wildfire, infrastructure projects, down to the farm field, and sharing those concepts and those understandings and the interrelationship with my kids, who I hope and I pray that they will then teach their kids and their grandkids for generations to come. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Just kidding. So I just wanted to, I know it's about almost 6:10 and I want to be respectful of your time as well. I think we were scheduled to about this time. So I think I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. Thank you.
Phoebe, that was wonderful. And thank you so much. As people write questions in the chat, I just want to say how valuable and meaningful your comments and story is. And we're so grateful that you shared it with us. Thank you so much. And I will call.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you so much for sharing. I was really moved by your whole presentation. And I guess I can just read what I wrote or say what I wrote. I work in watershed restoration in Southwest New Mexico, and I'm just really curious to hear about like what your favorite strategies are, because it seems like a lot of the work that we're trying to do is about slowing and spreading and infiltrating water as much as possible and supporting resilient ecosystems. And I've been really excited about working with ecologists and native plant folks about looking at like our palette of native plants and trying to thoughtfully choose plants that are ready, like climate resilient, ready for a hotter and drier future. So I just would love to hear you speak to what your favorite strategies are. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Martha, for that question. And I know people get mad at me for saying this, but it really depends, right? It depends on the unique attributes of that particular watershed. But if I can say what has worked in the watersheds that I have worked in has been grade control, some low-tech grade control structures. And it doesn't have to mean like you put in, walls of concrete. It's really small, the smaller amounts more often in the watershed. And that's a quote unquote watershed approach. And so what I found is, small check dams, small encouragements of the water to go a certain way, planting in certain areas around, major or sustainable flow to establish those plant species and then to create that seed bank for those others to propagate as the water flows or as the birds and animals come and eat around those areas. One of the things I am very careful about and mindful is, just getting any old seed mix and just for the sake of establishing veg to just throw it on there, because that introduces those invasive plants and weeds that we see that have a very short root system that really then compete out the others. So I've seen that unfortunately happen in some of the post-fire seeding responses. So I try to, and I don't like concrete. I do not like concrete. I do not like gabions. Really looking at natural based local features. So if you have a lot of angular rocks, I even, work with my kids sometimes and just say, okay, let's see what this works. Like, see how this goes. And to our amazement, just a few angular rocks in a system can really affect change. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you for that wonderful question and answer. And I know Russ has a question too, but actually in the chat first, we're going to ask Priscilla if she would unmute and ask her question, and then we'll get to you, Russ, and others.
Hello, thank you for sharing. Greatly enjoyed that. A lot of food for thought. My question that I have is, what is your opinion on our fire issues? Because we're having a lot of fires here in Grants, and they've been really, really bad. And up in the mountains, we actually had to move our cows down because it's so dry. And it's interesting because when we were up there, the clouds, dark purple clouds would gather, but they didn't drop anything. And so I'd like your opinion on that. And then the other question that I had is, what is your opinion based on wind turbines and solar power, like on the reservation? Do you think that that would benefit? Because I just recently watched a documentary, which was really informative, but it's not really sustainable, I guess, in certain aspects, because we're still using the power grid and we're still using other resources from, you know, our land or the land that, so yeah, I just like your feedback on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. So first of all, about the fires and the rain, the clouds, through a good friend, Jeff Goebel, and other ecologists, you know, stepping back, taking a breath and seeing that there is this interconnection between carbon and organic matter in the soils, and the connectivity between whether it rains on the landscape or not. And so when my good friend Jeff mentioned that to me about, you know, more carbon in the soil means more organic matter in the soil, means you have healthier soil, it will attract that rain and the water to the ground. So from a theorized scientific basis, he's talking about that and shared that with me a couple of years ago, I want to say like 10 years ago, of this connection. So science now is catching up to that and saying, yeah, there is probably a connection. We need more scientific data. So I'm going to go back to my Indigenous perspective. Is from an Indigenous perspective, that is totally true. I can point to so many stories of the health. Again, health of an ecosystem means you have healthy soil. If you have a healthy ecosystem, your base, one of your base blocks or foundations is a healthy soil. By healthy soil means you have life in your soil. So when you have life and a healthy soil, then that ecosystem is sustainable. You have the hydrological cycles on a smaller basis within those watersheds. But if you have a lot of, like the raindrops I was talking about, you have a lot of healthy ecosystems, then that produces that good balance in the hydrological cycle. And so my point in all of that is saying, I think the clouds are also telling us we're out of balance. To see them appear and say, almost like in a teasing way, and then no rain, you're like, something's broken here in this hydrological cycle. Something's offset. So that's my comment to that. And then that what is resulting in a lot of really dry conditions that are ripe for major wildfires in our mountains and in other areas. I mean, on the Cerro Pelado fire, there was one day we had 2% relative humidity. That's like basically zero. It was so dry out there. We had no rain in the spring. It was basically dry out there. Again, another indication, a lot of data, if we note it, if we write it down, saying there's a break, there's a disruption in that hydrological cycle. So to that question is, I think there's that interconnectivity there, the interrelationship. And then to renewable solar, wind turbines. And I'm gonna try to be careful how I frame this. So let me use a metaphor. Back to the watershed approach, and we have a lot of check dams in the system on a watershed approach. when the Army Corps came to Cochiti after the Las Conchas fire and said, okay, maybe you're now, yeah, you've demonstrated your Pueblos and may be flooded in Peralta Canyon, 47 square mile watershed. They said, okay, we'll put a big old dam, a 1-point system, protection system, 1 point. And I said, time out, time out. We already have a dam that we don't like. We're not putting another dam. And so I went back to the formal education and my experience up at Los Alamos after Cerro Grande of this watershed approach. So you have multiple little structures in an entire landscape. When you consolidate to a 1-point system, that's, how should I say, not a balanced way and approach. So I'm going to use that same metaphor and concept on solar and some of the wind turbines. So when we have one solar field, that's almost like the one dam approach. So, and I know I'm probably unpopular for saying this, but from a corporation utility scale level, that's why it's so important for resiliency to have multiple renewables in multiple places. Because if that one system goes down, and like as you were referring to, that one grid system goes down, that one utility line goes down, we're all like connected to that one source. But if you have multiple, right, and you have the ability to have something at your house, you will always have some type of source for power. So and again, it might not be, but to me, it seems to how my mind sees it is similar to like the one dam approach versus the watershed approach of features. Same thing on some of these renewable projects, which I know from a business standpoint. So if I put my business education hat on, I understand scales and quantity, you get better costs. I understand that. But if we're looking at a resiliency standpoint, it's looking at smaller approaches across the landscape. Thank you.
That's very cool. The idea of multiple sources and resiliency. And thank you for that thoughtful answer. And also for the fact that you said a healthy soil attracts water. And also, I know Jeff would agree that healthy soil infiltrates the little water that we do get so that we can use that more maximally for the needs of our people and the wildlife. But Russ has a question, and then also Amy Larson. So let them go for it. So Russ, why don't you go for it?
It's actually
Okay.
Teresa has a message.
Hi, I'm a friend of Russ. So I'm not as sophisticated about the water restoration systems. So what I'm learning from Russ and just from people that I meet. I talked to Phoebe a couple of days ago when we had lunch. And it's very interesting. I'm finding it very interesting. I know water has always been important, but what I have is mostly, it's more of an observation, not so much of a question, but there is a question. I like the way you brought up your kids and how you were, you kind of put them into your presentation and you were showing them how, it's important to get into the environment because, you're the future, basically is what you were saying is you're the future, they're the future. And you brought that out. You're not planting trees for you, you're planting them for your great grandchildren. So I thought that was a really good thing that you did. And you were kind of showing them how to, get in there and get your hands dirty and do it, become one with the earth. And I was thinking because our economy is based on capitalism. And so they're thinking, plant crops, harvest them, put them out to market and make money. And it's fast. And so what are the chances of getting the farming industry to get away from the tools? Because it's going to take a lot of, you have to pay people to go out there and plant the seeds. And, that's what I was thinking. I mean, it's good for the land, it's good for the environment, it's good for us, it's good for the future, but it's not good for their economy. So if you can get them to get away from the tools, what are the chances of that happening?
So thank you for that so much. And back to my kids, right? They're like, Mama, I would love to just jump on my sonny. I would love to just jump on a little tractor and ride around, right? And I said, tell Sonny Kukui, I said, hey, sorry, but that's not how this works. And it's going to be hard. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with everybody, with our communities, with even our way of life, of understanding that hard work is a necessity. It's not, and at some point we're going to learn that. At some point we're going to learn that. And it might be future generations to really totally grasp that. But COVID's been one of those, like, wake up timeframes that we've all just kind of walked through the last couple of years. And some people got it, and some people just went on, and didn't get the lesson. So to me, what that showed me was there's some, I don't know when that's gonna happen, but it's, unfortunately, it's not going to be a quick fix. I am pretty resolute on that, and it's going to be hard work. And it's hard for even me to tell my kids, we were out there on Saturday in the hot sun, and they're like, Mama, I just want to be in the AC. But it's the probability that a majority of the population will do that right away is very low. I totally admit that. But at least for our little community here in Cochiti and our way of life that is tied to that understanding, I hope that it at least can live on here in the Pueblo and in our culture and our way of life. And just to add to that, we execute that, or we implement that concept every time we perform a ceremony or a dance. And I try to highlight that, at least within my own family, is when we prepare for a feast or a dance, it's 4 days of preparation. And there's a reason why it's 4 days, and that you just don't show up the day of and go and dance. My grandma taught me, you have to be doing the whole 4 days. You have to go to practice all 4 days. You have to. And I didn't get it when I was a little girl. I didn't understand that. But now, as I'm older and I get that lesson of, you have to walk that path. You can't just like show up and be ready to dance. It's not, all the blessings don't come. All the protections don't come if you do it that way. And so I hope in my own culture, in my Pueblo culture, that we can keep that concept alive. As for the wider world, I know each culture has their own way of understanding that, or maybe might have also lost that. But I hope at least within the sphere that I have, we can keep that alive.
That's beautiful, and thank you for that. And I know that Russ was saying Regenerate America .com is a nice resource of Kiss the Ground, and Marie Nava agrees, and it is expanding, so that's exciting. Thank you for the question. We have Amy Larson, who has a really good question about how healthy soil can help with the fire situation.
Hi, Phoebe. I want to first just thank you for sharing your stories and your perspective. I mean, there was so much, it was such a rich discussion. And I guess what is landing with me at the moment, I think what you just said about the necessity for preparation. You can't just show up. I mean, that just kind of hit my heart. So I really appreciate you saying that. I guess my question, in addition to that, is I'm curious if either what you notice or what your perspective is of the soil in particular after a fire, you know, undergoing that intense heat. And, you know, I completely appreciate the what you said about depends on context. But I'm wondering if you can share any like commonalities, any, you know, things that you notice in terms of the process of healing, the ground healing, the soil healing, and especially in our kind of arid environment. So with that, whatever you can share, and I know that you mentioned quite a bit already, you know, in respect to that. You know, I know that you shared a bit about the soil, but if you have anything to add in that in particular, I'd really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that question. And I think what I see after a fire, it depends, of course, on the burn severity in a particular area. If you've got that white or gray ash, and in some parts, some black, but mostly the white and gray ash, we're hydrophobic. So that means all that organic matter in that soil, top layers of soil, are pretty much burnt up. And so what we have on those areas is Mother Nature. That's why she has rains, and that's moving that kind of one metaphor I used in one of the recent discussions was, it's like you scrape your leg, and how do you cleanse it? You wash it out. You wash out some of that debris and those things that you need to move in order to heal. And in some ways, that's how I see Mother Nature in these mountain areas, having to kind of wash out, you know, that top layer of scar tissue, if you will, and then to kind of unveil or reveal the soil, good soil again, that where we can establish new seeds, and we can establish new veg. And so I see that dynamic happening in some of our landscapes, again, depending on the burn severity and the amount of rain after fires. So it's the whole, it's all of these dynamics, from rain to soil to wind, even to even the falling of the trees that have been, you know, black matchsticks that are still standing in some areas. And then when they fall, that reintroduces some of that carbon into the soil. So there's all of these very complex, I would say, when you look at a microcosm or micro scale of these attributes after a fire, whether we're talking soil or vegetation. And so what I do see is, like, I've been on Cerro Pelado. We had Las Conchas, we had a lot of debris down. The Cerro Pelado came in, actually cleaned up some of that debris, and just like some people do on their farm fields when they kind of burn in some areas to stimulate growth, that's what we're seeing. So for those post-wildfire vegetation, like aspens, locusts, scrub oak that actually like fire, the Cerro Pelado has now spurred new growth for those post-fire shrubbery and vegetation. So now those are now stimulated in some of the watersheds in Cerro Pelado above Cochiti. And so it really depends a lot on what went on before, what's the burn severity, and then, you know, what are the unique features. So in some of our canyons, because it was burned so hot, we're actually down the bedrock. So what does that mean in recovery? Well, that means the mountain, she has to make her own soil again. And that's those long geological, long processes that have to happen. So depending on a lot of those, I guess, those dynamics, it will then affect the soils in those canyons.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. And I just wanted to acknowledge the time we ran a few minutes over. We started a few minutes after. I wanted to thank everyone for being on the call, and also Phoebe for such a great presentation and wonderful wisdom. I know Isabel has a closing comments, but I just wanted to make sure if you wanted to have a conclusion statement, if you, nothing formal, but if you wanted to say anything in conclusion, Phoebe, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you all for your time and attention and energy and everything that you do for your areas, your homes, your families. And again, I've seen a lot of discussion here in the chat, and hopefully collectively, you know, we're all that one little raindrop. And so collectively, a lot of little raindrops can make a difference. And so just to continue to do your best. And I'm hopeful for our lands here in New Mexico, and hope to see generations of, in particular, our Pueblo people here in this landscape for future generations to come. And so any support as sustainable resiliency, stewardship on the lands we call New Mexico is very much appreciated, not just from my Pueblo people, but for all people living here in New Mexico. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you so much. You really are a great soil storyteller. That was really great. And there's many thank yous in the chat. With that, many thanks to all of you for sticking around and being such good listeners and joining the conversation. Really appreciate you all, and have a good night.